32 ticks following. So they are swallowing. Monkey is swallowing. Snake self swallowing. Next, a swallow 2 will fly and come and swallow. You're ever swallow in a hollow gallow, making a whole lot of halabaloo. Jale kalu, we know say you chop the money some, so give me the loot. Do you really want a revolution or just your turn?
Welcome to Ake Arts and Book Festival 2020 online. My name is Tade Ipadeola, and I'll be hosting this book chat with Mr. Olanrewaju Akinsola, popularly known now as Onigegewura, who his latest book, Echoes Across the Niger, Historical Tales of Contemporary Events, became a runaway book of history and faction in the last 1 year. It covers more than half a century of a Nigerian history in a very interesting and engaging manner. Mr. Akinsola Onigegewura is also a lawyer of accomplished status, practiced in one of the biggest firms in the country. He's advised governors, he's advised government. He is more than competent to speak on all these issues. What interests us today is how it came about, this phenomenal book. Mr. Onigegewura.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ipadeola. I am delighted to be part of this year's Ake Arts and Book Festival. It is a very beautiful platform, and I identified wholeheartedly with the program and the project and the platform. It's a great initiative, and it tallies with my own idea of how arts and books should be promoted. I also thank the great people who are behind the scene, who are putting this event together. It's been fantastic in terms of communication, in terms of relating with us, in terms of sending packages to us. Everything's been fantastic. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Mr. Ipadeola.
Yes, you're welcome. We are here to discuss your book and actually your invention, both of the book and of a persona, which the literary terrain did not have before. Onigegewura. I call it an invention of both a book and a persona because that is what it is. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we did not know this could possibly happen. What gave you the assurance, if I may say so, that taking on this experiment will end in such a resounding success?
Thank you very much. When we started Onigegewura, it's a project. It's actually started as a social media project. And the idea behind the project then was, how can we use social media to advance the course of history? That was the idea. And many of the people we spoke with, they were like, nobody's going to read history. Anything that is not entertainment, anything that is not news, anything that has nothing to do with fashion and celebrity, nobody's going to read it. But we were convinced in our mind that there are some other people who will be interested in this type of story that we want to write. That was how we started. It started as a very small project with close friends. We started by sharing the stories on WhatsApp. And we were shocked that people who got the stories, they forwarded it, they shared it, and before we knew it, the story became viral. That was what gave us the okay, after this experimental stage, let's move on. Let's see whether the large society will accept it. And that's how we set the ball rolling. And today, just like history, Onigegewura is becoming part of our history, which is the subject and focus of our experiment.
I totally followed the blossoming of this phenomenon, like I discussed with you prior to coming on set. And one of the things I could say definitively about how you approached it was that you took a very soft approach at first before tackling some more, substantial and difficult subject. It is very interesting how you brought in the hook, if I may say so, because you discussed both things that are of everyday concern and some matters of historical importance that maybe governments over the years have decided not to teach. For example, the Iber Valley massacre of the miners in Enugu. Now, please, can you share with us what are your metrics for choosing the subjects you engage? Some hard, some soft. What informs your decision to engage one subject and not the other?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ipadeola. That's actually a very good question that people ask us. How do we zero in on a particular story or subject? My primary concern is this story educative? Is it something we can learn? Is there a message that we can pass across? That's always my primary concern. It's not really the entertainment value. If you read the story, if you enjoy it, well, that's good. But that's corollary, that's secondary to the subject. The most important thing is what value can we, the present generation, many of the, like 70% of the stories we documented in this book, they happened before this generation. And when I'm talking about this generation, I'm talking about the generation that's like 30, 35 years old currently. Now, many of the stories we documented happened before their time. And then things were so different at that time. Our idea is, what lesson can these people learn from what has happened before they were born? And how relevant are these lessons to the present generation? That's basically what informed our idea. So it is not about just writing history for the sake of history. No. And it's not about just picking on people to slander them or to unbury something that has been buried for so long. That's never really the focus of the Onigege Wura. The most important thing is this: is there a lesson for us? Because I believe that history is about consequences and accountability. So that's one of the reasons why we always try to see these stories. When the story of the Enugu miner that you just mentioned now, what inspired that story is that the feeling and the general assumption that Nigeria got our independence on a platter of gold, that nobody died for Nigeria's independence, which I believe is not historically accurate. Some people actually paid the supreme price. They paid the supreme price for the independence that we are enjoying today. So to pay tribute to the memory of these wonderful people, that's why we try to rewrite the story of the Enugu miners. They were wonderful people, and they died in the cause of protecting their fundamental rights to better living, better wages, and human conditions. Those are the reasons why we try to say, okay, let's try to document this so that an average young man, an average young woman, an average Nigerian in the street will appreciate the freedom that we are enjoying today.
Coming from Enugu, I want to move to Aba because you took us on a journey there.
Yeah.
And you told us again the story of the Aba Women's Revolt or the Aba Women's War, because
Aba Women's War.
Yes, it's been mischaracterized as a riot. And you took time to tell us what actually was behind the operations that we saw and are reading as Aba Women's Riot. Onigege Wura.
Yes, sir.
What was it that made you go so far in research to find out the names of these women, the real persons, flesh and blood behind all these issues that the country decided to cover for so long? What motivated you?
Thank you very much, sir. One thing we have observed about history is that history, most of the history that we read is actually written from the perspective of the very important personalities, the big people. They are the people we read those histories. But the history of the common man, who is documenting the history of the common man, who is telling the story of the governed? We have the story of the government, but what of the governed? What of the masses? What of the people? The nameless people, the unsung heroes. Who is writing their story? Who is telling their stories? If you pick any book of history now, you will be reading the story of the first premier, the first prime minister, the first president, the first this, the first that. They are the big people. But I believe that everybody is a hero. Everybody is a hero. Everybody has something to contribute. we should celebrate the ordinary people, in quote, the ordinary, the man in the street, the woman in the streets. They are playing a role, and if they are playing a role, that role should be chronicled, that story should be written, and that story should be told. That's basically why I had to let me focus on these people. We hear about women's riots, we hear about women's war, about women's revolt, but it's so generic. Who are these women? They have names. They live at a particular time in history. They contributed something. They did something so dramatic. Who are these people? Let's try to find them and put a name to them so that an average woman, an average man in the street, we know that, yes, my own history can also be recorded. I don't have to aim to a very high position in order to be relevant. Everyone has a relevance. Like the Enugu miners we just mentioned, Sunday Ayadoso was the first man to be killed. If you check Google, if you check anywhere, hardly will you find his name. He had a family, he lived, he died for this country, he died for his right, he died protecting his right. But who is celebrating him today? So what we have done is to try as much as possible to pay our tribute, though in a very small way, by celebrating, by making sure that generations yet unborn, we know that there was one person who died for Nigeria. His name was Sunday Ayadoso. The same thing with about women's riots. Now, if you now Google partly because of the Onigigewura story and partly because of the work done by some other people, now Nwayewura is now a popular name. People now know that the woman who actually started the war was Nwayewura. Thank you.
So from the east of Nigeria, I would like to come closer home.
Okay.
Before we came on set, I did say to you that you seem to have a bias for Ibadan, and of course, also before we came on set, you actually mentioned a name, even though it is also an expression, a manner of speaking. Erobodo. I looked at this fantastic book across the Niger, and it has many intriguing personalities in it, but Erobodo was not there.
Yeah, I like the book Erobodo. The challenge with a book like this is that there's a limit to the number of chapters. Otherwise, it's going to be so boring. It's not really written as an academic project or academic book. That's why the language is a bit. The language is easy. The prose is fluid, so that anybody who is interested in history can pick it. It's not only Erobodo that is actually left out. There are so many other important. The June 12th, the M. Abiola June 12th. It's not a story that featured here. So there are so many other important landmark events that in subsequent volumes, hopefully, we are going to incorporate them. Thank you.
So, if I may ask, how soon are we to expect a sequel to Echoes Across the Niger?
It's a work in progress. Even as of this morning, it's a work in progress. We do not want to sacrifice quality on the altar of quantity. Our passion is never been commercial. It's not about making money from this project. Our own sole passion is to develop this project to a place where an average Nigeria will be interested in history. That's basically our passion. So we are making sure that we cross our T's and we dot our I's. The first thing about writing anything relating to history is getting the facts right. We try as much as possible to get our facts right. We visit library, we visit elders, we visit archives, we read as much as possible, we gather as much materials as possible. So it's a work in progress. It's a work in progress. We are working on it, but we are not time bound. We do not want to give a definitive timeline. The challenge is that once we give a definitive timeline, you will be compelled to work harder, rush, and sacrifice so many. We do not want to compromise the quality. Apart from taking liberty with the language in this book, every statement you read is actually factual. Everything is either documented somewhere. Because one of the reasons I've been, and maybe my background as a legal practitioner, maybe it helps in this regard. Nobody has accused us of, libeling them, defaming them, or slandering them. We try as much as possible to ensure that it's only what is factually verifiable that we put in this book. So that's the reason why the second volume is taking a time.
Some time. I appreciate your concern for accuracy. As a matter of fact, let me confess,
Yes.
I read this book like a lawyer, not like a student of history. I read it to see if I could catch you in an inaccurate moment. And I did not succeed in catching you in any sort lapse. But again, I like to say, let us come closer home and look closer. I mean, with the benefit of the author himself in person as our interlocutor, you narrated one particular story which many people today do not know about. And that is the story of the first big land grabber in this country called Nigeria.
Yes.
And when I was reading that story, it struck me that it appears nobody has learned any lesson from this particular story that ended up in court. Justice Oluwa, who decided that case, just recently passed on. And, it just struck me that Mr. Akinsola, now more popularly known as Onigegewura, wrote about this, and it is still happening. Why do you think society is so slow to learn from its own history?
Thank you very, very much. I believe that the story of Ijigbadero, the king of land grabbers. That was one of our first stories, and when people read it, they also love it. Many people are able to identify with the story, and I believe that's part of the Onigegewura project. I believe that the essence of history is that there can be accountability. To me, if there is no history, there is no accountability, and there's no accountability, there's no consequence. The reason why people today can wake up and do whatever they do is because that they know that there's nobody who is going to call them to account for what they have done. And if there's nobody to call them to account, what's going to happen is that there's not going to be any consequence. What we have tried to do is to make sure that everybody today knows that there are some people, you call them silent chronicler, you call them historian, you call them journalists. They are there, they are watching what is going on, they are taking note, and when the time comes, they will write this story. Now, we have succeeded, I believe, to a certain extent with a Ijigbadero story. What we have done as a historian is to document this. Now, what lesson the society draws from it is left for the society. But we cannot say that Israel has not learned its lesson. In Lagos State now, there's a task force on land grabbing. There's a task force on land grabbing in Lagos State. I believe that's part of the realization of the fact that land grabbing, which we documented in this book, is actually a society problem, a societal problem. I believe that's part of it. The lesson of history is not going to be learned overnight. It's going to be gradual. It's going to be a gradual process. And I believe if every state in the federation can go ahead and establish a task force or an agency to check and control land grabbing, I believe that the lesson is being learned. But I must state that I do not know and I do not believe that is our story that influenced land grabbing task force in Lagos State. I believe the task force actually came before the story.
I was coming to that actually. It was one of the first stories that came out on the Onigegewura blog. And it stirred a lot of interest because, in part, I believe that at the time Ijigbadero lived, he was one of the most famous personalities in this city called Lagos. And yet, he was also a big-time criminal.
almost everybody has something to say about Ijigbadero. He was that popular.
Indeed.
And he knew everybody.
Indeed.
At that time, the idea of the judiciary, with greatest respect, that time, was one of the best in Africa. All this technicality, which has now become the order of the day, interlocutory injunction, motion appeal, interlocutory appeal, was not, that popular then. The entire trial of Ijigbadero, from the trial court to the Supreme Court, took less than 5 years. And it went through Lagos, High Court of Lagos, Court of Appeal, Lagos Division, and then the Supreme Court. And the judgment came to an end. The case came to an end. I doubt if within 3, 4, 5 years, we can get that type of judicial speed now. I doubt it.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Onigegewura. Because I will go back to the very first story in the book, Echoes Across the Niger, which is Hurricane Sanusi. And one of the things that bothered me was that even though you were writing about Hurricane Sanusi as something that happened in the past, it has not yet been concluded. Not all aspects of it has been concluded.
It has not yet been concluded. So, and you read the book again, sir, on page 43. At the end, the last sentence there, or the last phrase, is the story has certainly not ended.
Not ended.
It has not ended.
My question to you, now talking as a lawyer now to another lawyer, is what kind of judicial reforms does Onigegewura think we need in order to stem this, proceedings that take decades when they could be concluded in a year or two?
I think our appellate process, number one, the first challenge has to do with our appellate process. That's number one. I believe that it is not every matter that you get appealed to the Supreme Court. That's why you have the Court of Appeal. And the way Court of Appeal is structured, I believe they should be able to make pronouncements which is going to be binding, which is going to be definitive on many matters. It's only a matter of very serious significance of constitutional importance that should get to the apex court, the Supreme Court. So when we have all matters that has to do with interlocutory, any matter that is interlocutory appeal is either one or two things. Number one, every interlocutory appeal, every point of interlocutory appeal, keep them aside. After the judgment, appeal everything together. But not stay the substantive matter, go on voyage to the Court of Appeal, and then up again, and then come back again just because of an interlocutory point. That's number one. Secondly, I believe that if we are our judiciary is not federal, with greatest respect, our judiciary is not federal. If you are saying a federal judiciary, you have it at the High Court. But when it comes to the appellate courts, it's not federal. There is no federal court at the region, at the states. We had Western State Court of Appeal in those days. That's actually a truly federal judiciary. We have the Federal High Court at the trial court. We have the High Court of State at the trial court. That's federal, and that's the end. That's where the federalism ends. When it comes to Court of Appeal, it's unified. It is National Court of Appeal that we have. It is National Supreme Court that we have. That means a case of land in Kara Namoda, we get to Supreme Court in Nigeria. A case of chieftaincy in Ilaje Seudo, we get to Supreme Court of Nigeria. We don't need that. Every chieftaincy matter, every family matter, matrimonial matter, all these matters should be ending at the Court of Appeal of their states. They should not go to federal level at all. It's only when it has to do with the constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That's when the matter should get to Supreme Court. If you have that, you will discover that the Court of Appeal and then the Supreme Court, they will have time to develop more robust jurisprudence like we had during the time of Kayode Esho, Aniagolu, Acholonu and co. We have that. But as long as we have this present structure, where every chieftaincy matter must get to Supreme Court, where every family matter must get to Supreme Court, where every matrimonial matter or any whatever matter must get to Supreme Court. No, truly, we do not have a judiciary. And then Professionally, I believe that the professional bodies, they need to do more about lawyers filing what I will call frivolous appeals and the application. I believe that should be very, very important. When cost is awarded, and that's another important point, when cost is awarded, the cost should not be for, if the appeal is dismissed for being frivolous, I believe the cost should be given to the lawyer to pay, not the litigant. You are the one who advised your client that the case has merit. So if they should go to Supreme Court and then the case is thrown out, there are so many matters now. When you pick a law report now, many matters, many of the issues they call recondite issues, they actually they are moot issues. They are not recondite. It's just that we just want to go to the Court of Appeal, to Supreme Court to make any point. I believe all this, the professional body should come and regulate the filing of appeal. If you do that now, matters will be concluded speedily. Within 3-4 years, the matter is concluded. But when you still have a matter that was started before I was born, then where is the justice?
Thank you, Onigegewura. I will say that I did accuse you of being very biased towards Ibadan in this book. I live in Ibadan. I know it is a city of history. I know it is the seat of very many kinds of complex intrigue. Throughout one of the most colorful and I may say complex persons in the history of that city, Lamidi Adebayo, and I would say that you did justice to the subject, because this is a very complex persona, how he emerged, what he did. My question to you, Onigegewura, is this.
Yes,
do you do these things without any form of fear in your mind that some of his loyalists, because he still has loyalists, would take you on and challenge you, maybe not intellectually now? Do you ever have such thoughts?
No, not at all, not at all, not at all, not for once, not for once. As long as it is documented, as long as it has historical value, as long as it's something that people can learn about, there's nothing that we should be afraid of. We are like a journalist. If something happens, a journalist has a duty to record it. A historian has the same duty. Anything that happens, we must write it, we must record it for the next generation to read. I think that's our duty. So why should we be afraid that someone is going to... I believe that we are enlightened, we are civilized, and we are cultured. If you have an issue with one of our stories, I won't mention the story now for certain reasons. One of our stories actually became very controversial, with the family involved coming up to challenge our narration. But they could only challenge the narration. They could not controvert any of the factual statements we made in that story, because it's happened and it's reported in law reports. And what we just did was to bring it out and document it. So if a family has an issue with it, then what the family can do, or when anybody is aggrieved, is to write their own stories. That's just the beauty. That's just the beauty of intellectual work. So that someone will harm us, I do not believe that someone, and because we are not creating something new. We are not creating something new with Onigegewura. When we are writing history, it's not that we are writing a new story, or we are inventing something. No, that's not what Onigegewura is doing. So if you are going to have problem with Onigegewura, for example, with the Adebayo story, then you need to go and get Gani Fawehinmi, who reported the judgment in part 9225 or thereabout. In the case of Inakojo and Adeleke, you will get Gani Fawehinmi and all the editors who worked on that. Then you will get all the lawyers who are involved. The journalists who commented on the matter, you will get them. So it's going to be a very long chain. I do not believe it will cross the mind of a reasonable human being to challenge by any other way, except by way of intellectual way or by taking us to court. I believe those are the ways you can actually controvert. It's a matter of history. It's a matter of history.
Thank you. You know, the reason why I asked that question is because when I was young, I learned carpentry.
Wow.
They say that if you're a carpenter, you tend to treat every problem like a nail. You're an intellectual. You're a lawyer. You are used to tackling arguments, but the people who worship somebody like Lamidi Adedibu, they know very little about these things. That is, one of the reasons why I asked you that question. But coming back to the method you adopted, I think that you must have done something special to move from an audience of 30 to an audience of more than 9,000 in less than a year. I mean, I operate social media. I know several people who operate social media. That kind of geometric growth doesn't just happen. If you were asked to explain your methods, what would you say is the secret of your methodology as a person who writes history?
The short answer is very simple. I think it's just original content. Basically, I would just the simple and straightforward answer. Original content. This is not a matter of copy and paste. Every story you read on Onigigewura blog or any story you read here, it takes time to write them. It's not just speaking. We will not just consult one source. We will not consult one book and put the story there. No. We try to, as much as possible, we try to go the extra mile to try to find the original document. If it's a case, I try to go to the court or anywhere to dig up the case to see how it was decided. So I believe that people are able to identify with the fact that the people behind Onigigewura, they are coming up with genuine article. So everybody is actually interested. And the followership of Onigigewura became like cult-like. Why do I say it's cult-like? People, anybody who copies Onigigewura story, people will start like, no, this is Onigigewura story. And even got to a point that some story that we did not write, but people believe that they are a bit related to Onigigewura story style of writing. People accuse the people who put them up like, no, this is Onigigewura stories, forwarding them to me, asking me to confirm that I wrote this story. I said, no, we did not write. It's because of the originality. I believe that, and there's always a market for that. If you are able to come up with original content, many, and with greatest respect, many of the bloggers, so to say, whatever you read on one blog is likely what you are going to read on another blog, because it's in the public domain without any addition of any creative work, creativity or anything. Nothing is involved. But for Onigigewura, we try as much as possible to put original content. I believe it's that original content that people are interested in. If a gap is missing, we try as much as possible not to go to town with that story. Like the story, if I may mention the story of Bode Thomas. The story is like 70 or 80% completed now. But because one fact is missing, the case involving only Bode Thomas in Ibadan with the Arema of Oyo, I need to get that judgment. If we don't get that judgment, the story will not just be up to that standard. So when we now get the judgment and we're able to put it in public domain, people will be like, wow, this is good. And naturally, people identify with quality. They will always come and read. And again, that takes us back to the point I've made earlier, that we will not sacrifice quality on the altar of quantity. No, it's not about, we don't have any deadline. History is timeless. And that takes us to the theme of Art and Book Festival. African time. History is timeless.
Thank you very much. It struck me while reading through this book, and more importantly, while reading what you were publishing online on social media, that in a question of years, maybe 2-3 years, you suddenly started having the same problems that people like Wole Soyinka and Chinua Achebe had. And that is somebody writing something and ascribing it to Onigigewura, which is not a problem that many writers have. But in Nigeria, it has been known to happen, but only to people like Soyinka and
the Apala story. I have the materials, but I was yet to write it. When somebody shared it and attributed it to Onigigewura, it became like a mini fight. People arguing that, no, Onigigewura wrote it. And I was like, And no, I like the writing style. I've read it. It's beautiful. But if you write it, our way is going to be a bit different because I have some materials that, they were not considered when the other gentleman or gentleman who wrote that. So we were like, no. Like 2 or 3 stories have been attributed to Onigegewura, which we did not write. I met a very another statesman now, and he was like, when I read your Apalara story, I was like, sir, I did not write. I said, no, you wrote it. I said, no, sir, I did not. At least I should be able to know the stories we wrote, and Apalara story is not one. It's definitely I'm going to write Apalara story. I'm going to write it. We have the materials.
It is important, and I'm looking forward to it. But now, talking as a lawyer now, and talking to other bloggers who may in the near future have this kind of problem of having something that they did not write ascribed to them, you would agree with me that it can be a magnet for trouble. How would you, because now whether you like it or not, you are a star, and even not if it is as Onigegewura, you're a star, and people are already ascribing these things to you, do you constantly have to make disclaimers about what you have written and what you have not written? How will you advise other bloggers? I know you are more than capable of defending yourself, but how will you advise other bloggers to protect themselves in this kind of situations?
What we try to do, we don't even use law to do it. If you read the first 6 or 7 stories, we wrote it. There was no mention of the writer. It was it was written in first person narrative. But when people started copying our story, starting from, I believe, Sunny Ade's story, that story went viral. Everybody read it. People were copying it. There was a gentleman who went on Twitter, and a gentleman tweeted every single line in that story. When he now got to that point, we now discovered that, okay, what we can do in the meantime, we can't be fighting everybody, we can't be suing everybody. And many of these people actually, they won't have the means to defend the suit. So what we did was that we now personalized the story. Like every paragraph or every 2 paragraphs, we now put Onigegewura is telling you something, or as Onigegewura told you, or the way Onigegewura narrated in that story, making cross-referencing. So therefore, even if you copy the story and you put it out, there is no way that the name Onigegewura will not reflect in the story. So if you now go ahead to remove Onigegewura, then that will actually very indicative of the fact that you intend to steal and plagiarize the story. That's one of the things we did, and it worked. People will now, instead of just ascribing, put it in on their blog as nameless or anonymous, now they will now as written by Onigegewura. Any of our stories from like the 6, 7 stories, Sunny Ade story going forward, if you do not see Onigegewura in the storyline, that means it's not really our story.
Fantastic.
But again, the idea of Onigegewura, why I'm not using my name, is because Onigegewura is a generic name. It's like Lagbaja, it's like Tamedu. I do not want Onigegewura as a concept to die with me. Really, I do not want it to die with me. I believe that Onigegewura historian, it should be something that can be identified with every historian who is writing very good story, using very good language. If you mention Lagbaja now, everybody's talking about Mr. Deologunde.
If you mention Onigegewura now, I believe, yes, everybody knows what you're talking about. Which takes us back to another writer of a slightly different inclination, Fagunwa Omo Akowediran. And when I first saw your use of Onigegewura as a pseudonym, my mind went immediately to Fagunwa and his Akowediran. And now you are confirming that you actually want it to live in perpetuity as a craft, which I find very, very interesting, because not only do they accuse Black people of not reading, they also say we don't write. And this is not true, as you have proven. Yes, you wanted to say.
If we have, I'm sorry, sir, to say this. One of the challenges we have is the fact that we make general statements. We make general statements. I'm very sorry to say this, but somebody will wake up and make a statement. It will not be corroborated. There will not be statistics to support it. And then it goes on like that. For example, when you say Nigerians don't read, how many bookshops have you visited? How many books have you conducted this subject on? And then you arrive at that conclusion that Nigerians don't read. If we have 200 million Nigerians, if 5%, if 10% of this figure is reading, that's massive. That's more than the population of some African countries. So how can you say that 10 million people reading, actively reading, it is not a reading population? I disagree. I disagree. People read and people write. It may be relative, but what I've discovered is that people read. Nigeria, we have more than 200 million Nigerians. So 10% of that is going to be 20 million. 5% of that will be 10 million. 10 million by any standards, whether it's money you are using, is actually a lot. So for 10, even if you now even come to 5 million, 5 million people reading actively, I believe that Nigerians read.
Indeed.
And we are connected with this Onigege Wura to show that Nigerians actually read. The question is this: what are they reading? I think that should be the question.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, so back to echoes across the Niger now. I want to take you to task on the subtitle of the book.
Yes.
You called it a very, very interesting, and if I may read it to you,
yes,
it says historical tales of contemporary events in Nigeria. Don't you think it should be contemporary tales of historical events? That's the first thing that occurred to me. Okay. But I know you are playing with some ideas around that place.
Right. It was not very easy for us to get that coinage the way it appears. We were wondering, should it be contemporary tales of historical events in Nigeria? Should it be tales of historical contemporary events in Nigeria, and so on and so forth? But our focus here is history. And because we are not writing history in the way a university historian will write history, so we don't want to call it a book of history. So because we have played with fact and fiction, the language, we have recreated the scenes, that's why we now decided, okay, let's use historical tales. And because many of these things here, the oldest story here in this book is the Aba Women's War of 1929. That's the oldest story here. So we still believe that majority of the stories are contemporary and they happen in contemporary times. We're not talking about the ancient time in the 17th, 15th century or thereabout. So we still believe that everything that happened in this period should be contemporary events. And because we are writing them as a story, that's why we now have historical tales. I believe we could have played another coinage.
No, it's fine. I actually thought it was a trick by the author to make us look closer into what was happening. One of the earliest stories that you documented, and I appreciate the fact that you went into the courts, the court system, to retrieve a lot of national history. It was the story of Haruna Ishola with intellectual property at that time. One of the questions I had in mind to ask you particularly is that looking at what happened to Haruna Ishola at that time and looking at contemporary trends today, there seems to be no change whatsoever in the modus operandi. Why do you think this is so with Nigerian artists? Why do they have to take everything into their own hands? Why is it that in 2020 we don't have professionals who can manage this talent and make them blow up like they do in any other part of the world? Why?
Okay, thank you, sir. There's this popular saying that has been attributed to George Santayana or George Sayantana that those who learn by history are doomed to relive it. I believe that's the reason why people have not learned that aspect of history, and that's why the story keeps on repeating itself. It was not only Haruna Sola. The same thing also happened to our Baba King Sunny Ade and the TYC record owner, Chief Olanrewaju Akinsola. The need for professionals to come and manage artists, I believe, is extremely important. And until this is done, this particular history will keep on repeating itself. I think that's just the way it is going to be. People must learn that history. Music is a business, it's an industry. And just like any other history, it should be managed professionally. Look at what has become of English Premier Leagues when it started, when it was reinvented in 1990s, in the early 1990s, 91, 92. Look at what it has become now. That's why it's become global brand. When I was growing up, I identify with, of course, naturally, I identify with Shooting Stars of Ibadan, ICC. That was the team that everybody from the old Oyo state who identify with. Then Abiola Babes came, and of course, all of us will still identify with Abiola Babes, who was if you hear of a British football club at that time, it must be from Pool Betters. Those are the names that is only familiar. It was only familiar to people who are playing bets, pools. But from 1993 thereabout, everybody started identifying with one foreign British club, English club, or another, and that's still the trend today now because it has become professionalized. The same thing with our music, not only music industry, artistic industry,
the film industry, yes,
the art industry generally. I believe that there's need for professionalism. My own is, I tell people, my own is just to write history. My passion is law and history. When it comes to business, I give it to the people, the team. Marketing of Olanrewaju Akinsola is not really my business, because if I do marketing, I'm going to make a mess of it. Let me just write the story. That's my passion. We have people who are actually professional, who can do all this leg work and get results. So the same thing with every artist too. You cannot do everything. If you recall, sir, when Nollywood started in the 90s,
yes,
it was very common then to have written, produced, directed by Tade Ipadeola. Tade Ipadeola was the everything. But now, gradually, you have professional script writer who will come up, give you very good content. They may not be the producer, they may not be the director. Then you go ahead and look for another director.
Indeed.
I think that's the part of the lesson in the Haruna Sola story and the King Sunny Ade story. The need for us to be professional in whatever we do. That's the lesson of history. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So now to the nuts and bolts of your book, which I cannot sing enough praises of this book, because I will tell anybody, I knew when the blog followership was only 30 people.
Wow, thank you.
I now know that it is possible to actually hook Nigerians into engaging their own past. Maybe we'll gradually, do something about our future. No, but you have succeeded now, I would say, in drawing a critical mass of people to looking at history, our history, not British history, not any other, not Asian history, our own history. You have succeeded in drawing this critical mass of people, because 10,000 people is critical at in any context. What do you plan to do as the next level? Because now, I'm sorry to disagree with you. People will not say you're a lawyer again. People will now actively refer you to you as an historian.
Yes.
How do you plan to introduce rigor into what you are doing, greater rigor? Because historical accuracy is one of the things that got people interested. How do you intend to do that without losing this critical mass that I would say you single-handedly built?
Thank you, sir. I think we may need to, segment the readership. We need to segment the readership, because I believe that there's a need for a comprehensive book or many books about Nigerian story and Nigerian history. I believe it's very important. The stories that we learned in primary school, secondary school, was that Mango Park discovered the River Niger. How can that be true? River Odoya, Odoya. Everybody has been calling Odoya from time immemorial. When people travel to the north, they call them, they have gone to Okeoya. So at least the Yoruba people of Nigeria, they knew River Niger before Mango Park ever dreamt of coming down to this part of the world. So we believe there's a need for us to write that story. So to answer your question, I think the way to go about it is to segment the readership, so that some people will not, while people are very educated, who are intellectual, they'll be reading the very, very serious stuff with the footnotes. If you discover that we did not really put any footnotes here, we did not put any footnotes. It's deliberate, because it was deliberate. We did not want to, that's not it. But at the end of the day, we were able to put the bibliography to, like, these are the book reference materials. But if you are writing academic for schools, for institutions, then it has to be properly, footnoted with all the normal academic requirements. But for general reading, this is actually a general reading. It's a light reading, just something you can read while you're on flight, while you are waiting for your flight, while you are relaxing at home. It's not tasking at all. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I have to ask this question because it is important.
Yes.
Do you have any fears that the character, the persona that you have invented, Onigegewura, may subsume Olanrewaju Akinsola in the future?
What we try to do is to say, that's why we use Onigegewura for historical writings. Onigegewura for historical writing. When it comes to, many people do not know that Onigegewura is actually a tax lawyer. When I write my tax book, I have written a couple of tax books. The name is Olanrewaju Akinsola. When it has to do with law, arbitration, taxation, it's Olanrewaju Akinsola. But when it has to do with history, it's Onigegewura. We try to separate it's like just when the Lagbaja put on the mask, it becomes Lagbaja. When he remove the mask, it's beside the Ologunde. When I'm writing history, it's Onigegewura that is doing the writing. But when I say stand up in court, with profound respect to this honorable court, my name is Olanrewaju Akinsola. My name is never Onigegewura in court. So there are two distinct personalities. We try to keep them apart.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
So back to the book, and I think this will be the last question that ask. You have done one great work of iconography. I will not call it hagiography because that's not what you did. With one of the foremost lawyers that we had in this country, the late Chief Gani Faweyemi. We know that we may never get another one like him this century. But what would you say should be done to our legal education in this country so that we have people like that to speak of in the future? What would you encourage our educators to do?
Yeah, thank you very much. The challenge of our legal education is that it's with greatest respect, it's still rooted in the past. Law is expected to be dynamic. Law is changing. Law is evolving. Now, 2 years ago, if we were having this program, even last year, all of us will be sitting together on the same platform, on the same podium, having this discussion now. But the fact that I'm in Abuja, you are in Lagos, and we are having this conversation is indicative of the fact that time is changing. The same thing, if time is changing, then law, as the bedrock of every activity in society, must also change. And I believe that's the first thing. We should drop the idea the way we learned law in those days. We learned law now as if we are memorizing in Arabic school. I believe that should not be the case. Nigeria, I've studied in Nigeria and I've studied in some other jurisdictions. And I discovered that it's only in Nigeria that, at least out from my own experience, that they were set you to cram all the provisions of the criminal code, all the provisions of the Evidence Act, all the provisions of Sales of Good Act, and so on and so forth, to go and write a legal examination. Whereas when you want to practice in court, you will have your books before you. So why can't we do the same thing for the legal training? So our legal training, the implication is that it's only people, there are so many people who are brilliant, but who do not have the capacity to retain information. It's just difficult for them. So these people will be disadvantaged by the way we do our legal training. So I believe that there's no, if you are afraid that people are going to cheat or something, what is the cost? Ask people to pay for brand new criminal code. You give it to them at their entry examination. Nobody needs to cram section 419. Nobody needs to cram all these sections. The problem is that many of the people who are going to be writing the examination, the only people who will pass very well are people who have been able to cram these provisions. I believe that's unfair. Then when it comes down to the substance, I also believe that many of the subjects we are still doing in our legal faculties now, law faculties, we need to, overhaul all of them. We need to overhaul all of them. Many of the we had a lecturer in our university. We say, you must pay your agent commission. You must pay them. Let me give you a recent authority on that. Adeyemi and Betmont Finance, 1962. That's not really a recent authority. Law should evolve. The way we do is the subject we teach should change. The way we do the teaching should also change. Law is a practical course. Spending 5 years in university, 1 year in law school, really studying what? I believe what we need is to be dynamic. They need practical experience. Law students need practical experience. If I have the opportunity, that's what I'll be telling the authorities. So.
Thank you very much. I will still ask this question because it is a sensitive matter in this day and age. Yes. You told the story of the woman to be convicted of armed robbery in Nigeria.
Yes.
And of all the 26 stories, historical tales that you took on, I must confess that that particular one moved me to tears because it affirmed to me that in Nigeria, there was actually no difference between the male criminal and the female criminal. What I mean by that is this. You took pains to actually retell just what this woman used to do as part of her robbery operations, even though she was a teacher in daytime. And it shocked me that even though I practiced as a public prosecutor for so many years, I never once came across this particular precedent in our law or story in our classrooms. And this, for me, underscores the need for such projects as what you have undertaken. It is not popular to take on women criminals anywhere in the world. Maybe now that everything is becoming, glamorized, maybe they're improving that now. But you did this particular task without glamorizing the personality involved. It must have been a curious choice for you in the light of the abundance of material that you had to deal with. What actually, moved you to determine this story must be told and people must know about it in this country? What?
The same way you felt about the case, that's the same way I also felt about the case. Throughout my years of legal training, nobody mentioned that case. And I believe one of the reasons has to do with the fact that it ended at the High Court at the time. It did not go. If a case does not proceed to upstairs to the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, the tendency is for it to be glossed over. The reason why Anilomowura's case was popular, although it also ended at the High Court, there was never conclusive appeal, was because of the personality of Anilomowura that was involved. It had been the same if it had ended at the High Court. It will not be there. You have to go into the law report to come across the judgment of the case of Bayewumi, the state against Bayewumi. The same thing with the case of Anna Tudumala. It ended at the High Court. That was it. At that time, it was actually popular. It was reported in all the media houses because that was how it was. In the course of reading newspapers of that time that I came across the name, and I went to do further research in order to produce the. It has nothing to do with the gender of the party involved at all. We believe there's no, what do you call it? There's no gender in crime, sir. There's no gender, so to say, in crime. So it was not really the gender. The reason why we put this is that the lesson I want people to draw is when people think of criminal and crime, people tend to think of criminal as people who smoke, people who drink, people who you will find in the in joints. But with this story, you say this person, professionally qualified, educated teacher, and got involved directly or indirectly in this type. So that's just the lesson, that it's not everybody you see putting on suit and tie, dressing normally, that is beyond crime. Crime does not know class, does not know profession. Anybody cut across classes. I believe that's the message. It's not really about the personality of whether she was a woman. If it had been a man too, the same thing would have happened. We would have recorded it. But the fact that somebody, an average middle class professional, got involved in crime, I believe that was what motivated us to write that.
Thank you. I will not ask on all the 26.
Yes.
I want people to go to the bookshops to get their copy of this fantastic piece of social experiment, I will call it. When I want to think about it in other contexts, I say a fantastic piece of invention of both book and author. More power to you, Onigegewura.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very, very much. I've really enjoyed speaking with you for the past 1 hour, 14 minutes or thereabouts. I really thank you very much. Writing this book was something we were passionate about. We really enjoyed writing the book, and it gave fantastic. It gave us joy that the book has been accepted widely. When you look at the picture at the back, you can see this gentleman looking ahead. But if you look at the boot is actually very dirty. It is deliberate. It's because, coming from the past, we do not want him to forget where he was coming from. At the same time, we want him to be looking ahead. He's looking ahead to a bridge that is there to be completed. So the book is supposed to be a bridge between the past and the future, the present and the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Tade Ipadeola.
It's a pleasure.
Very engaging. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And with that, we come to the end of yet another interview, Ake Art and Book Festival 2020 online.
That 5 minutes madness only you can understand. Visit myspectre.com to get your Spectre experience. Spectre, loans in 5 minutes.
If you ever need a new place to go, you can join me in a world of words. Many seems like I'm nowhere to be found. If you look, you'll find me in a book. Let's take a ride to the past in the back of a phoenix. Let's float around the moon. You'll never be alone. Now you know where to look. Find me, find you, find the world in a book. You'll never be alone. Now you know where to look. Find me, find you, find the world in a book.
don't just think of ourselves as a bank. We think of ourselves as corporate citizens with responsibility for growing the economy. Reading and education is a key part of it. But equally important is having access to reading materials at home. A lot of the intervention we've done throughout this COVID is to ensure that people can safely navigate the uncertainties of the COVID crisis and come out of it ready for, to live again.
Let's take a ride to the past on the back of a phoenix. Let's float around the moon.
The dreams that we have are limited by what we have directly interacted with. What reading does is it makes it possible for you to begin to live in worlds that don't yet exist. One read creates a discipline of reading. One read puts me on a timeline. It gives me an important book and I have an opportunity to read it and to collaborate. It's almost like having someone who does your book selection for you. If you have editors and people who are really good at this saying to you, this is the book for the month, I value that. I want to be able to read in a community. I want reading to be a collaborative thing. I want reading to be a communing, and One Read allows me to do that. I will use One Read any day, anytime.
Stranger's Guide is not a typical American travel magazine. Our mission is to dive deep into a single location, commissioning work from great writers and photographers, famous individuals, as well as up-and-coming new voices. This year, we decided to go to Lagos. And we are proud of the volume we produced, with original work from some of Nigeria's best writers and photographers, working with luminaries like Wale Soyinka, Molara Wood, and Femi Kuti. We think this is a very special volume, and we're so excited to bring it back to Lagos.
Sticky, spicy, sweet.
I want to go there. Don't touch me.
I will get you arrested. Very, very easy. Relax, everybody!
He shot you!